Hello, everyone. We have people joining and dropping in. This is Ellen Burns-Johnson speaking. I'm going to kind of kick us off this morning and then hand things off to Ethan as we get going. As you're coming into the meeting room, just as we're getting things started, go ahead and try to test out the chat window. If you're new to Zoom, you can find the chat window kind of at the bottom of your webinar panel. And I'm going to type in there really quick. Hello, this is the chat window. So this is where we're going to be using the chat window to kind of communicate with each other. If you have questions, please go ahead and enter them in. And it's a great thing to hear from where you're from. So if you want to mention where you're from in the chat window as well, that'd be pretty cool to see. One quick tip for the chat window, there is a drop down that lets you choose who you send your chat message to. You can send it to panelists, or you can send it to all panelists and attendees. Thank you, Ethan, for advancing that slide. If you want your comment or question to only be seen by me and by Ethan, then you will want to send that to all panelists. If you want your chat message to be seen by everybody, maybe you're giving yourself an introduction, then you want to make sure to send your chat message to all panelists and attendees. So Susan, for example, just said that she's from Toronto, but no one else can see that because she sent it to all panelists. So just go ahead and take a moment to double check that right now. I think it's helpful to have it as a default set to all panelists and attendees. So as we're going ahead and as we're getting started here in the meeting, let's test out that chat window. Make sure that your chat window is set to all panelists, attendees, and go ahead and give us a quick introduction to tell us who you are, tell us where you're from. Gregory's from Lakewood, Colorado. Hi, Gregory. I'm going to type my message in here from the Twin Cities, where it is cold. All right, great. We've got people from Chicago and from Denver. Hello. Awesome. Great. Looks like everyone's entering their locations. Hello, hello. Just a reminder for those of you who are just joining, make sure that if you want your message to be seen by everybody in the audience, make sure that your chat window is set to all panelists and attendees. So we'll take another minute to make sure that everyone's oriented to the chat correctly, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Ooh, you have people from Southern Illinois. Well, that's Ethan. There we go.
Sounds so exciting.
That's you. Oh, Jay's in Minneapolis. Hi, Jay. We're neighbors. RJ is also in St. Paul. I'm assuming that's St. Paul, Minnesota. Rich is dialing in from Chicago. Very cool. Nathan's in Montana. Hi, Nathan. From London. Excellent. All right. We've got people from all over the place. Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in. Again, my name is Ellen Burns-Johnson. I am an innovation coordinator here at Allen Interactions and working with Ethan Edwards, Christopher Allen, and Dr. Michael Allen to get the Allen Academy going and to bring some learning about learning to you all in the L&D field. I will be passing things off to a moment to Ethan Edwards, who I hope you're very familiar with. Ethan's been a senior instructional strategist for Allen Interactions for a while, and is also serving as an instructor and the dean for the Allen Academy. Ethan will be taking you through a little sample of the instructional or the learning experience from our ACIP program today. And with that, Ethan, I'm going to hand it over to you. You can go ahead and get started.
Okay, well, thanks, Ellen. Yeah, welcome everybody. I'm glad to have you here. And what we wanted to do was just have an opportunity to sort of share a little bit about the Academy and give you a taste test. I know people who have heard about it thought, well, they just need to know a little bit more how the experience works. And so that's what we're hoping to do today in this hour. But first, I would just want to say a little bit about the Academy, why we started it. I've been working with Dr. Allen for almost 30 years, and we've seen a lot of changes and we've seen a lot of improvement in the industry, and yet we continue to be frustrated by the fact that so much e-learning that's created is not very good. To not paint too fine a point on it, but the technology changes, and yet we're not able, a lot of us who are trying to build e-learning in our organizations are frustrated in knowing that we should be able to do better, but the combination of the tools and the training and the experiences sort of keep us from doing that. And so we really wanted to start this academy to address that issue. You know, we have powerful tools, but most people use and learn them by a subset of tasks that don't really help. And so also, a lot of times training is removed from reality. And so we want to make sure that our learning theories, we have a way to really connect that to the real sorts of training problems that you have. And then also, we want to make sure we give enough practice. Just like anybody learning a new skill, I think people who are just becoming designers and developers of e-learning, they need practice. And so often we're set to perform without mentoring, without experience, without figuring out how to actually improve our own skills. And so these things were driving us to figure out how could we create an experience that would address that. And we created one of our first programs. The Academy is going to have a number of programs in colleges, but the first one is in our design college, and it's an Allen Certified Instructional Professional. And it really is to help someone gain confidence and experience and knowledge to be able to be competent about creating pretty elevated, in terms of design and impact, e-learning. The first level 1 credential we're talking about is this Allen Certified Instructional Professional course program, and it is composed of 4 courses. The first one, which we call 101, is Designing Interactivity. And interactivity is at the root of creating good e-learning. And so we spend a lot of time really exploring what that means. It's more than just asking a question, it's really setting up an experience. And then in all the years we've been teaching this, there's always been a frustration among our learners expressed is that, okay, they're starting to get interactivity, but how do you build that? Because it looks different than what they are used to building. And so Design 102 is actually using software to build these sort of context-rich experiences. We are currently teaching it in Storyline and have plans to offer it in Captivate as well. But it really is a way to look at your tool sort of in a way that goes beyond the basics and looks into how do you use it to create these experiences. And then the third is a course where we go back into design, but we speak much more about the learning theories and applying instructional knowledge into our designs. And finally, we have a capstone project where we have coaching, sort of a practicum, where each person gets to work on his or her own project with individualized coaching, trying to apply everything we did in the classes. But the difference is that it is a project chosen by you, hopefully one that has relevance in your organization. So that's the whole picture, and where you have been running this, and it's been very exciting to see the results with our students and so forth. But as we continue to offer it throughout the year, we want to encourage others to join. And so this session here is to help you make that decision. So it's actually representative content. It's not identical. In fact, it's different. So you'll get new content. But I wanted to share sort of what the content is like, what our approach is, both in the first 2 courses. So jumping in, I just want to talk a little about the Designing Interactivity course. As I said, it's not focused exclusively on instructional design. And as you know, learning, hopefully these are some non-controversial statements. First, that learners remember what they do. So what actions and activities they're involved in is critical for learning. Just telling things isn't teaching. That's a statement that's bandied about quite a bit, but it's really true. Just exposing content rarely results in particularly good learning. And then when you're dealing with adults, and truly this is useful for everyone, but adults in particular, they have very different needs. And so an approach that is inflexible is likely to not be a good fix for most of your students, okay? Now, I think hopefully those things are non-controversial, but in that world, traditional instructional designers, how we're trained and presented to do design, we spend an awful lot of time writing and perfecting content screens, editing and making sure that we are putting the right information on, and our subject matter experts are demanding that. And we spend relatively little time in figuring out, well, how is a person going to interact with this? How will there be variability in how each learner approaches it? And how we can gain them in activity rather than in just telling. And so that's really at the core of everything we do, is creating instructional interactivity. The content writing, not to say it's easy, but that's not the challenge. The challenge to make good e-learning is to figure out how to engage people in a motivational and meaningful experience that's going to change their performance. That's going to build new actions. So I want you to take a minute for a second at a simple interaction. This is something I think that would be very typical in a course. And this was taken from a course on security in the workplace. And so you can imagine, this is just a little sample, that there were several pages of information explaining the rules for this organization of how do you determine as a supervisor if there are threats to the security of the organization or the individuals. How do you prioritize those, and what is your responsibility as a supervisor? So here's a question. You have a responsibility to promptly address employees' behavior that poses a threat to others. Which of these statements represents the most immediate threat to workplace safety? A, expression of frustration with ordinary office environment. B, criticism of team members, and so forth. So you can read these options, and this is a very typical question, but I hope from a distant perspective, you can see that this is really more or less a rote memory task, a trivia task. Can you remember the words that were said? It doesn't really indicate anything about your competence to act on this, okay? And I actually just sort of spilled the beans on this. I forgot I had this question here. If you want, put your own perspective in chat. If you see interactions like this, what do you say about what's good about it? There's something good about it because we do it constantly, but what's bad about it? If you have anything additional to say, or you want to repeat what I said, please feel free to add your perspective there in the chat window. Yeah, so it does test knowledge. So if that's what your goal is, it does that, but it doesn't link with the job. It doesn't link with performance. And as Victoria says, why do we do it so much? It's easy to do if you're in a hurry to create. Yeah, and I think what we have found and what organizations find is you can do a lot of this kind of training, and you can check off the box and say you did training, and perhaps some of the people might be able to parrot back some rules, but there's not a very high relationship between actually changing performance unless there are other things in the environment to cause that. So what we want to search for instead is what we call instructional interactivity. Now, this is a concept that actually, when I reveal it, it may seem sort of simple. And at first, I have to admit, when Dr. Allen was working on this and we were trying to encapsulate what it was that differentiated good interactions from bad interactions, I was hesitant to say this was enough. But in the meantime, since this has been out and it's been published and written about, and I've been using it always in designing instruction, and it is just amazingly powerful. So I want to give you confidence that as I present this, in its simplicity, it really is a recipe that creates success. What we have found is, and that many of you mentioned this in the chat window, that context is imperative for creating meaning. that just putting content on neutral presentation slides doesn't help a learner who doesn't really know what's going on to create meaning about it. And by context, we mean you have to provide a framework for the interaction to tie it in some way to the performance environment and provide relevance and meaning in the real world. And with that question that we just looked at, those descriptions you could read it and not even relate it to a work environment, because if I wasn't already understanding that, I could relate it to just definitions or not have it in sort of the idea of these are things that happen. And so the first step to do is to create context. Now, I'm sorry, there's gonna be a little bit of a disconnect here because I have to switch over into Storyline to show this example, and I wasn't able to link them because of a network problem. So I'm just gonna escape here for a second. And I wanna show you what we mean by this. So here's our base interaction that we just showed you. Come on. So here's my question and my choices, and if I click one, a threatened act of criticism of team members, let's say that's the highest security, and I get feedback, no, that's not right, there's a higher ranking concern. But so I could continue asking that, but again, you can see how there's this really no context. It's just all based on words. So what do we mean by creating context? It's putting your knowledge into some kind of a framework that that provides that meaning, not through words, that people can absorb and get placed into significance right away. So again, there's millions of ways to do this, but just in this case, if I wanted to add context and not change a single other thing, here I have the same question, I have the same choices, but simply by putting them in an office scene where there are people saying these things, it provides a ridiculous amount of richness and meaning around that question. And even if you don't do anything else, adding context creates meaning and creates relevance and creates a connection point between what you're trying to communicate and the learner. So here, if I do the same thing, expression of irritation with family members, she's saying that as meaning, and then I get the same feedback. So not really much difference at all, but, and I'm not saying this is a good place to end, but I want to illustrate these components individually and show that even if this is all you do, you've improved the situation. Okay, so there's context. What do we do? What's the next factor here? It is challenge. What do we mean by challenge? Yeah.
I just want to jump in here. Just a couple of questions came in from Julie and Ashley, and I think that you're going to be getting into this in more detail as you go through the rest of CCAF. But the questions that Julie and Ashley had were, how do you convince SMEs, subject matter experts, and stakeholders why this is the right way to go, instead of just the telling?
Yeah, well, it's a huge challenge because sadly, even leaders are often very hard to get out of their own experiences, and most people's experience with training is bad training, and there's a lot of benefit to going to e-learning in terms of just the logistics of not having any people travel and individualization and everything, that masks the fact that you're wasting everybody's time when the training doesn't have an impact. And so we have a big burden to make people realize that there's more to e-learning than just delivery. What we have found as the thing that really changes the ground and opens people's eyes is we have some examples of of the same content treated traditionally and that which is treated in an interactive way. And once you see that contrast and say, which one do you think is would be worth our time doing. It's very hard for somebody responsible saying, well, I think we should do that sort of bad interaction because we can do it. But then it does open the question, well, what would it take for us to do that the other way? And then you can start the conversation of the different time and the different skills needed. But you need to sell them on the difference before you start presenting the challenges. Because once people realize it makes a difference, then you have a reason and a way to invest and a way to make choices. But it's a big challenge, and I don't want to belittle that in the slightest. And you've identified one of the biggest hurdles for creating change, and it's just people's closed-mindedness and their expectation, and the fact that, well, the rest of the industry is doing this, so why are we supposed to do something different? Yeah, okay, Julie. So the time factor. Yeah, I don't know how to talk to people about that, because it's like everything. It's a matter of what outcome you want. And it's true that it takes a lot of time, but you can't bake a cake in 5 minutes. And if you want a cake that tastes good, you have to be willing to put in the time. And yet I think in a way, our e-learning leaders say, well, I'm only going to give you 5 minutes for whatever reason, for some preconceived idea of how much you should be able to do, but I want it to be a great cake. And it just can't happen. And I know that's not a good answer. People don't like hearing, well, that can't happen. But unfortunately, it's the truth. There are things that take time. And there are ways to cut short, make shortcuts. Things don't have to be elaborate. And in fact, the two interactions that I just showed you take about the same amount of time to create. It's a way of thinking about it and approaching the problem, that it doesn't automatically require more time, but it does require the idea that you need to design instruction, that you can't just grab information, plop it on the screen, and expect that to be training. Okay, the great question, and Ellen, keep monitoring that. I'm going to move on, but this is a conversation that could go on for for a long time. But please elevate continued responses. But I do want to continue on our path. Okay. So I was talking about challenge, and one of the problems with traditional bad e-learning is that it's not very challenging. And what I know is that the challenge that most learners come to training with is how to get out of this, how to finish this with as little difficulty as possible. And those kind of questions that are in that first default, it's often much easier to complete them without paying attention. There are all sorts of rules that work. One is, I'll answer anything, it'll give me the answer, and I'll go back and answer and let me through. That's quicker than my reading anything and thinking. Or sadly, with using the rule, the longest answer is always correct, gets you through a lot of stuff. But it's interesting to see how good people get at answering multiple choice questions, often without anything to do with the underlying content. And so that's how learners respond to their own challenge of, I don't want to do this and I want to get done quickly. What we need to do is do something to create a challenge that requires attention, instills motivation, creates an intention on the learner's part that's stronger than, being an Alt-Tab key press away from reading email while the lesson goes on its own way. Risk is a really great tool so that learners have to attend to details and be careful of the response. Okay, so challenge is all sorts of things. It isn't making it hard necessarily. It's making it so that the learner is held accountable and that it requires interpretation and mental processing. And that's really the problem with page turners, is you can press next without any engagement at all. And if your mind is not engaged, there's no chance you're going to learn anything. And so creating interest, creating challenges, creating outcomes, creating tasks that the learner can't miss is an essential tool in creating challenges. So let me go back to our little progressive example here and show you what one way of adding might be to add challenge to this. So we already have our context set, but now this is, you're going to laugh when you see it because this is the slightest, mildest challenge, but we have found that it actually changes the way learners process this information. So, on the previous one, what people were saying were statements of fact. Let me go back to that to point it out. So we added the background challenge, but the choices were essentially the same. And the learner had to sort of just remember these explicit phrases even without meaning, and they could get through with it. One simple way to add challenge is to force you to do some work on your own. So here, instead of having the definitions as my choices, there's words in these people's mouths. So my boyfriend was so late getting to the movie, I wanted to kill him. Well, what's that example of? I have to think, okay, does it talk about anger with relatives? That wasn't the high priority, so let me go and think. I hate this stupid printer, it always screws up my documents. Okay, well, that's just mild frustration. But you notice how, as a learner, I've got to be doing mental activity to translate this into what the content was. And people feel good about having to do stuff, and in the context and so forth, it actually gets more engagement. If I get this right, 2 things would probably this apartment's the gasoline and a match, then I'll get the answer correct. But even now we have 2 steps. Context it's in an office environment, and a little tiny challenge is I have to exert a little bit of effort to make this make sense. Now there's great, if you could do more, that would be great. I just wanted to have something very simple for the purpose of this demo. Okay, so there's context and challenge. The next level we need to, the next step in this process is to think about the activity or the action that the learner is doing. An awful lot of the actions and gestures are abstract and carry no meaning in the real world. ABCD, I've never in the world had to click ABCD in my job or professional environment, except when I was being tested. And so that all that time we remember what we practice. And if I practice in the lesson doing trivial things like hitting A, B, C, or D, what I take away is that was a big old waste of time, because all I did was learn how to click these buttons and make weird guesses on how to choose what they are. So what we want to do is instead create gestures that somehow suggest actions that you would take in the real world. We want to avoid generic, or what I call academic responses that only exist because we're sitting here on a computer and somebody wrote an SAT test that labeled the choices A, B, C, D, and then we've replicated that 1 million times in the rest of the world there's no particular evidence or reason why that should be the only way that we respond. And so what we're looking for is, how do we add anything that implies action that has meaning outside of the real world? Okay, so what does that mean in our little example? How did I get out of this? Oh, here we are. Sorry, while we're waiting for this to load, any questions, Ellen, that I should respond to?
There was one. Let me just bring it up really quick. So we had one question earlier that talked a little bit about kind of the format of the course. This is more a question about the program rather than the content.
Yeah. Sure.
And that is basically whether how this format of having multiple courses compares to like the experience of doing a 2-day certificate class,
Yeah.
which are pretty ubiquitous.
Right. The thing, there's benefits of both. And actually, sometimes we have opened this program with an in-person 2-day course, but we've also done it in sort of the 6-session distance course. And the thing that, of course, it all depends on facilitation and so forth, but there's a value of being together, and so you can talk more generally and there's a more flexibility and so forth. But the thing that we gain, and we're really trying to take advantage in the web versions, is that there is time to practice. When you have a 2-day concentrated session, almost the whole time is trying to give you content, and even the exercises are, okay, work on this for an hour or half an hour. And it's sort of the problem we talked about earlier. Some exercises, to really give you the chance to solve them, take more time than that to really invest in. And so you don't get authentic practice or experiences very easily in those 2-day seminars. When you get home, then you've got to try to do it on your own and you're lacking the coaching. And so that one aspect that this distributed course does is that we have homework between those 2-hour sessions. It's not overwhelming by any means, but it provides you time to think about things. And one of the greatest tools in learning is what we call the spacing effect, that having time between to just even not study it, but to live with something and then bring it back into your discussion and your understanding immensely impacts how well you remember it and learn it. And so in educational terms, you get the spacing effect when you do a distributed course, like the way these are distributed across 3 weeks, 2 courses at a time, which you can't get in the seminar. What you're giving up is the direct contact. So hope that answered that feel for how I compare the 2 experiences. In terms of the content and the exercises, they're pretty similar. We really, when we do it online versus doing it in person, we really are focusing still on the same core material, and the same experience is at the root of it. Okay, so here we are with activity. Now, notice that nothing is presented to me. I have to take action before I can solve this at all. And what I have to do is roll over these people that are highlighted. And when I do, then I can see that there's an action involved, that this isn't a static thing. People say things. And then to make my choice, instead of just clicking on it, which, clicking on pictures is actually way better than clicking on the letter A, but that itself doesn't imply, well, what do I do with it? Well, in the real world, your job as a supervisor is to have a conversation with this person if it really is an infraction. And so I have to take this person to my office. And so there's a drag and drop. Not that drag and drop is superior in any particular way, but implying to the learner, you do something here and it involves change. And you can do that in a number of ways, but that's what we mean by better gestures, better actions. And so you can't do this interaction now without realizing, I as a supervisor am responsible for doing something. And it's an active process that takes place in real time. And none of that would ever be said in words. And yet it's communicated in a way that creates meaning and significance. Okay, and then our last component here. Come on, shoot, here we go. Is we have context, challenge, activity, and then we have feedback. Because the teaching occurs when you respond back to the learner about the effectiveness of their actions. You want to show consequences, and you also want to deliver content. Just judging, saying, no, that's wrong, in itself is, again, back in the academic context that doesn't necessarily give the learner responsibility or help them to assess a situation differently and so forth. And so that also is a time you have the learner's attention to correct them with real information. So what does that mean? There's two aspects, and my illustration only is going to show one of them, unfortunately. But there's extrinsic feedback where you provide content. And then there's what we call intrinsic feedback, which again tries to keep the learner in this context rather than pulling them back out into saying, okay, now read this textbook. And so here, we added some intrinsic feedback to this situation. So if I take this guy who's mad about the printer and say, I got to talk to you, and bring him to my office, what happened? The result of not finding out that the person who's going to blow up the place, who's saying, I need to apply gasoline in a match, that there's a more serious consequence about not doing the right thing than simply getting a chance, no, you're wrong. And so this is intended for you to go back and try again. If there weren't a set try again, it would say more particularly, the rule is that someone who's threatening others is a bigger concern. But also saying, there are dire consequences for you as a supervisor for not taking care of this. There could be great destruction. Okay, so that is a really quick tour of this idea of context, challenge, action, and feedback. And it's something we spend quite a bit of time exploring and figuring out how to help you come up with your own designs for your own projects, okay? I was going to take, this is a really quick challenge, but and we would spend more time on a more sophisticated challenge in the class, but I want to challenge you all to put some ideas in chat for how you would do context, challenge, activity, and feedback. For this challenge, you're going to create an online basic culinary arts program. And your one unit has to be, how do you create a perfect soft-boiled egg? So what kind of ideas do you have in your design that you would be able to introduce context, challenge, activity, and feedback as you had created interaction for that? Again, there's just open brainstorming. Any idea is worth mentioning. But thinking about what I talked about, what comes to mind as elements in an interaction to teach this?
So Ethan, just to double check, what you're asking everyone to do is just enter maybe their idea for what the context could be or what the feedback could be.
Really any element, whatever comes to mind about how might you enhance the activity in this, or challenge? Is there some challenge that comes to mind? So yeah, put them in the kitchen.
Good answers coming in.
Yeah, so once you start thinking this way, it isn't that difficult. It's just getting yourself in a different mind and saying, instead of asking a question, I'm going to put the learner in a kitchen or have a stove, and you've got to cook the egg. You're going to manipulate. You're going to decide how long it's in the water and all those kind of things. Yeah, Kate, you'd have them choose which tools would be needed. You'd have some that were irrelevant. And then make sure they'd set the timing. Maybe you have an egg timer you'd flip, and you'd have to say when you take the egg out. Yeah, you're all getting it great. So that's a very clear example. It becomes harder when you think about, well, how would I do this if I have to teach a compliance course on sexual harassment? But we want to use some of these same principles, and it's necessary to do that in order to create training that works. And so that's sort of the creative energy and the direction that we try to take in that first class, to really upset our idea of what online interactions should and need to be, and then really address, how do you do it without making it a terrible big problem? Addressing Julie's issue earlier about, well, why should it take so long? You can do this without it becoming a burdensome, long process, okay? So I do want to switch over to give a little window into what we mean by our second class, building instructional interactions. And I just want to take a tiny little bit out of storyline work and show you some of the ways that we might talk about those features. If you don't know storyline at all, hopefully you'll, yeah.
Just since we're switching topics, I had a really great question from Yvette just a second ago. She was asking, can you use these same principles in a software simulation?
Oh, absolutely.
The CCAF principles.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I would say inferior software training does is it leads you by the nose too much and there's not a challenge in finishing it. It'll say, okay, the first step is to click the file menu, and it'll put a box there and says, click here. So you click there and they say, good job. And then you go, and then it reveals it and says, click on new with a little green box around and say, click here now. Well, you're doing all the work for the learner and they're just sort of doing rat behavior and not having to put things together. And so a lot of times our software training has a challenge mode where you have to do all the things. It's a simulated screen, so you're not going to get buried and lost, and we can keep track of what you're doing. But you have to put the whole steps together without assistance. That's actually a pretty cool challenge because it mimics exactly what you want people to do in the real world. And so we, unlike just focusing on, you know, as help, you might have a demo, or if I'm stuck, I could ask for a list of what's the next step. But the challenge is to do that without asking for help. And it's amazing how people respond to that. And so instead of having too much, well, you know, don't start by having a long demo of this is what you do, especially if people are already a little bit familiar with some other software programs. Let them see the challenge and let them do it, and let them choose to say, you know, I need to have a demo of this to help me. Because some learners like to watch it, and some learners would be much more comfortable having the steps to understand. And again, that goes back to our principle, you know, adult learners have strong preferences sometimes, and we need to have our interactions accommodate that. So I hope that helped answer that question, but we sure do use this almost all the time, every time we do software training. Okay, well, what I have here, come on. Oh, here. Is a sort of version of what we are building. And I would just want to talk about some of the elements that we use to create context. So one of the problems is that if you use, you know, any of these tools right out of the box and use the templates, and you use sort of the way they build questions, it looks like that's something very different than we're building here. The truth of it is, no matter what you build in whatever context, online, about 99% of what you do is going to be multiple choice questions. So a lot of it isn't a radical redesign, it's how do you present it in a way that learners don't get that idea. What I have here is a question, and if you know storyline at all, this shouldn't be too much of a mystery. There's a, we've got all these people in the scene, and then we've got these speech bubbles. And the speech bubbles have a sorry, my system is so slow here. But each speech bubble has a normal state, and then it has a selected state that it changes to when you click on it, so you can see which one's selected. And so we basically have a multiple choice question, and the 5 choices are these speech bubbles. And then this was actually created using a free form object. And so you had all the benefit of it managing all your choices and the feedback. Now, the problem with this is that by default, you have to have one feedback style for all of your questions, because you sort of edit your feedback on a master basis. And if you don't edit, you have the standard. And so if we take a look at this, gee, I don't know what I can do to make this speed up. But the thing that I'll show in a second is we change the context of the question, but when we are still bound by sort of arbitrary formats for the feedback, it sort of destroys the whole context of that we built. Oh, come on, why is this? Or if I should close other windows. I was having trouble with my my system right before this. I'm afraid we got some little lag going. Okay, here we go. So if I picked the wrong choice, my boyfriend was so late getting the movie I wanted to kill him, I get this incorrect. And so now all the work I did for creating the context just got destroyed, because this throws me back into saying this is just an academic hurdle that I've got to get through. So it'd be nice if we could change that feedback. And by default, there really isn't any way to do it. There is you can go and edit the overall feedback pane, but that means every interaction in your lesson is still going to have the same thing. And what we would like to do is to have our own feedback and have a coach perhaps come up here and talk to us within the context of our world. Now, you'll notice back here in the forum view, these messages are adjustable, but they all are played through standard displays, which are these layers that are created for us automatically when you create a free-form slide. And unfortunately, if you go in and you try to edit them, it doesn't let you. You can retype this, but you can't like get rid of this green checkbox. You can't remove the box. But the trick is we can get rid of these altogether. We can delete these layers that were created that are providing feedback. So there's an incorrect, a correct, and a try again. And we're going to get rid of them all. And then if you create your own and name it the same way, so we're now going to create our own correct layer. So I'm going to say, here's new, and we'll call this, the trick is you got to call it exactly the same thing. So this is going to be correct. And in that, instead of having that standard feedback, I'm going to have, I'm going to use my media library. Let's see, media library. And pull an image from there, this guy here. I'm going to insert him in our layer. And he'll be down here at the bottom. And I'll give him a speech bubble. And let's see, we'll make that, oh, come on, go away. Move that thing, okay, there we go. My Zoom control panel was in the way of doing anything. I'm I'm going to fill that with white. And it's got a nice border. And in that, it has, I can just create a message and I'll say, that's correct. A threat to others is the highest priority. Okay, let me set my text to black. Okay, and so we could, you know, that's good enough for the purpose of this. And so now, and then we can put we could have our own, we can put a continue button in here. We'll just say, okay. And so we can put a trigger on there to have it close the layer and so forth. Okay, so, and then I could duplicate that and make an incorrect, and then just change what he's saying. No, they're the highest threat is a threat to others. Go back and review your priorities. Okay, and then we could do one last one here that will be try again. So as we're doing this in the course, we do a similar situation like this, except you would all have your own version of Storyline open, and you'd have these resources, and you'd be following along and hopefully doing this as we do. And I check to make sure that everybody's on board. Let me get this one. And then we have what we call brain teasers, which will then give you an opportunity to apply these same ideas to a new problem. So we actually do a couple new significant ideas in class, and then you get a brain teaser to work on between classes. That's just a different way that it might have a little bit of twist to it. Okay, so just want to prove to you that this works now. We're going to go back to preview this. Notice we don't have to change anything else because the freeform item is still untouched, and it's going to look for a layer called correct and show it. Even though it wasn't the one it wanted. So let's see, my boyfriend was late. No, try again. Okay, I hate the stupid machine, and let's get the right one. Okay, that's correct. A threat to others is the highest priority. So you can get out of that bind of having to stick with the way Storyline wanted to do it. Now I'm going to show you one other thing in our last few minutes. Another one of the things that I think is so powerful, and I'm not sure that everybody sees the way to use it so powerfully, is that these states on objects can be a huge way to vary your content. I think oftentimes we just think about them as button states and hovering and so forth. But if you create your own custom states, you can really streamline your work. Now, one of the problems, and mentioning how long things take, is it's really hard to keep things up to date when resources are spread out all over the file and to find it. And let's say you're going to rebuild this course, but you need to get rid of the coach. And you need to go in all the different places and try to reformat that. So what you want to do is reduce the number of times that things appear, so that if you fix it one place, it fixes it everywhere. And so I just want to show you another way that we can implement this feedback with only having one version of the feedback message. but we still can use our form view. So what I want to do is I'm going to go to correct, and I'm going to copy what we have here. Our coach and the speech bubble. So I'm going to copy that. And now back in our base layer, I'm going to paste this. And so now we have in our base layer, the picture of the guy and the oval caption. So this is we're going to call the picture 9 our feedback. And I'm actually going to go to the caption and take that out. I'm going to cut that. And now go to our feedback and look at the states. And normally there's just a normal state, and I'm going to edit the state. And to this, I'm going to add the speech bubble. So this object is not going to only have his head, but it's also going to have the speech bubble. Okay, and this is going to be here, but as its default, we're giving feedback too early, so I'm going to change it. And the instructions are going to be: click on the employee with the most immediate threat to office security. Okay. Now, so we have one state, and that's, let me take this down a little bit. Let's see it. That's our normal state. But I'm going to duplicate that, and we're going to call this correct. Oh, I lost my speech bubble, but I can add it here. And it's going to say that's correct. A threat to others is the highest priority. Then I'm going to duplicate that and call this incorrect. And in incorrect, I'm going to say, no, there's a higher ranking concern. Now we're up to the hour. I need to skip ahead, but you could see how you could put in a try again as well. But I'm done editing states. And now I can get rid of these layers altogether, these feedback layers, because they're not doing anything anymore. I'm going to trash those. And now when I'm going to add a trigger that if my boyfriend was so late getting to the movie, I wanted to kill him. When I click on that, I'm going to change the state of feedback to incorrect. So if I preview this real fast, if it goes so fast. So here's our feedback message with the default state saying giving instructions. When I click, that feedback changes immediately. The free form still does all the scoring and everything that I would want, but it doesn't need those feedback layers, which add a lot of just more places to hide things. And so we have one immediate way to simplify and have fewer resources where you have to maintain. And so you can see how you would add that trigger to the other ones and the correct when you go to correct and so forth. And you can have, it's a great way to have rapidly changing content or feedback messages without the overhead of swapping in too many different elements. Okay, so I know that was very quick, but I hope it gives you a chance to see the kind of, we try to talk about skills within Storyline, not starting just as a basic course, but learning how to do things that actually we use in our development all the time. And then the things that our developers find so handy for creating CCAF sort of interactions. So we have 2 opportunities to start new cohorts. They're here, and Ellen, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about those. Oh, actually, January 21st is already going. Sorry, I didn't update this slide.
Yeah. I can just talk a little bit about that. So I did post our email addresses in the chat window, as well as some links to descriptions of the program on the Allen Academy website. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more, you can go there. We have 2 upcoming opportunities to join new cohorts and to try out the experience. We are going to be in Orlando, Florida for the Training Expo and Conference, February 22nd. So there's a pre-conference program where you'll be able to take the first course on site there with Ethan. And then we also have another cohort for the full program starting on May 4th, which is Star Wars Day. So that's important to mention. And that is the next time we're going to be starting up the online experience. So go ahead and you can take a look at the course descriptions online. You can register for either the February 22nd one or the full cohort that starts on the 4th. A couple of questions coming through on the chat, and we can hang on for a couple more minutes to answer those. If you're interested in listening in, feel free. Susan asked, do we only use Storyline, or are there other apps that we do show? Do we have an app? And another related question coming in from Yvette again is, do we have an online cohort for Captivate users? The 4-course program focuses on Storyline. We are working with instructors coming into the academy to get a Captivate version of the training up and running, and we should be able to launch that in the next couple months. Yeah. So stay tuned for the Captivate, folks. I know that's another question we get frequently is, do we do Captivate? Do we also teach in Lectora? We've had people ask about that. We will be adding those as electives coming up pretty soon.
Yeah, the thing is, the way the 102 course works, we need to focus on one tool. And so we'll be having alternative 102s looking into the future that you would know which tool will be used. But it wouldn't work to have Captivate and Storyline in the same session because the skills are very different.
Yes. Okay, good. So Ashley asked a question about the upcoming session in Florida. The question was, do we have to participate in Florida, or can we participate online only in February? So the February version is going to be it's going to be on site in Florida. And then if you are on site in Florida and you want to join the full cohort, you'll be grouped in with the cohort that starts in May. So the on-site cohort that's going to be live at the conference in February, you can start there if you happen to be at the conference. Be a great time to jump in and to get that first course out of the way. And then you'll be able to continue the program with the rest of the courses online starting in May. Now, if you're asking because you are only able to make online courses, totally relate to that, right? That's kind of how the modern learning environments work. Then you can start the cohort online in May. So you'll be able to just do the first course online and then continue with Design 102, Design 103, and the Practicum Design 104 as part of that summer cohort. So I hope that answers your question, Ashley. And you're welcome, Susan. Cool. Okay, any other questions? We'll hang on for another couple minutes to answer. Ethan, just one thing that came in, a couple more things. Do we offer one-on-one coaching around this? And I thought one other thing we could talk about was kind of the length of the program and the length of each course.
Sure. Well, you know, we have our weekly sessions, but there's always options for individual questioning through email and so forth. And so you have access to the instructors just as you would in any other course. But the Design 104 course is really focused on providing one-on-one mentoring, so that when you are on your own private project and you would work with the instructor to deal with the challenges that are inherent in your project. And so the whole idea is leading us up to that practicum that you get that chance for coaching. Overall thing is each course takes about 3 weeks, sometimes depending on where other holidays appear and so forth, we might have a week gap, but generally they're 2-hour online sessions twice a week for 3 weeks. So we have 6 sessions, typically on Monday and Wednesday or Tuesday and Thursday or some combination of those things. And then we have a week or so between courses, a week off, and then we start the next one. And so you get through the whole course in about 3 months, depending on, we're still working on the ending of the well, it's a little about 3.5 months sort of is the footprint of the overall project. Other aspects of that aren't clear?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to touch on the coaching piece again. I think that's a good thing to just kind of emphasize is that we do make sure that the cohorts, the class sizes are very small. And so you get a lot of one-on-one attention during session periods, but we also do have that Design 104, which is a practicum. And Ethan, you're working with some students in that right now, and you've been setting up one-on-one meetings with them, right? To kind of go through their individual projects?
Yeah, one of the first stages we do is prototyping ideas, and I've got individual sessions set up for tomorrow. Actually, I'll be working with each of them for about an hour. So it'll take most of my day, but it'll take an hour of each of their days. But it's a great way to connect, right. and it's what we want to offer, and I think it's what is so hard for especially for somebody who's working independently or in a very small group. How do you get help? How do you have somebody to talk your problems through? How do you and so that's what we're hoping to set a model for that, and to provide that sort of jump starting to make sure that the design ideas that we have shared have a chance of taking root.
Great, thank you. I had one last question coming in from Kate, which was, is it possible to take each course outside of the program? So Ethan talked a little bit about each of the courses in the ACIP program. There's Design 101, which is about interactivity, Design 102, which is about building instructional interactions and storyline. Design 103 really delves more in depth into instructional best practices and kind of writing and working with subject matter experts, and then Design 104 is the practicum. Right now, we are offering those 4 courses only as part of the program. We are looking at launching some electives this year that will kind of take your learning beyond just those 4 courses. If you're interested in taking courses one at a time, though, we would like to hear from you because we want to get your feedback as we continue to shape the program, and we need your guidance in determining where we want to take the Allen Academy next. So if you have thoughts about what we should develop next, what kind of courses we should offer, or how we should be offering those courses, we want to hear from you. So I'll enter my email in the chat window one more time. If you have any thoughts on that, please feel to drop us a line and let us know your thoughts, opinions, and suggestions.
Yeah, well, our highest priority is making sure that that the courses that you need, you get access to. So we are actively trying to figure out how to best implement an opportunity for you, how it should work if you want to take one course at a time. A couple of things we're concerned about is that there is a benefit of having a cohort, because so much of this is based on conversations and discussions, and as people get familiar with themselves, with their group, there's a lot more carryover for that. But then also making sure that we do need to enforce the prerequisites, because each course does rely on having the content from the previous ones in this series. And so, but that's something we're working on and are let us know if that's a high priority for you.
Okay, Ethan, any final thoughts?
Well, no, not for me. I hope this was useful or enlightening. I'm sorry it was so rushed, but we want to get a lot through in an hour. Just to know that the storyline training would be not that rushed, and we make sure that you're following along and getting it and can do all those pieces. Because that's the problem with just watching somebody do something. That doesn't enable you to do it yourself. So in the real world, that's the sort of content, but it's much more active and immersive experience. So anyway, thank you so much for spending your hour with us today. And hope to hear from you and see you in the Academy at some time in the future.
Thank you all.